But thank you all so much for joining us for the power of pigment, understanding color in art. The history of color unveils remarkable stories from purple dye extracted from sea snails to ultramarine blue, once more precious than gold itself. Artists deploy color strategically to create pathways through their compositions, creating movement that guides your experience. These calculated decisions transform flat surfaces into dynamic spaces, influencing how you perceive depth, feeling, and significance. So, what hidden messages might you discover when you begin to see paintings not just as images, but as carefully orchestrated color symphonies designed to evoke emotion and direct attention? And this is all led this morning by art historian Jane Oneail, founder of Culturally Curious. Jane holds a master's in art history from Boston University and a master's in education from Harvard University Graduate School of Education. She was born and raised in New Hampshire and has worked at some of the state's most esteemed cultural institutions, including the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, where she served as executive director, as well as the Currier Museum of Art, where she held the role of senior educator. Jane founded the Currier's Old-Timers Cafe and led the tour program for the museum and the Frank Lloyd Wright designated Zimmerman House. She has taught art history at the college level for more than a decade, most recently at Southern New Hampshire University. That was a slightly different biography than I normally read for you, and it threw me off a little bit, Jane. Let's see, nearly 200 of us who are watching live and the many more that will watch the recording. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jane for joining us this morning. And Jane, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Robert. There is nothing like your introductions. You just bring the best energy to this, so I'm going to try to match it. This is a really different program. If you've been to one of my programs before, this is going to have a slightly different feel to it because unlike every other program I've ever done, where the goal is to understand the picture, to come as close to an understanding of the picture as possible, today it's really about understanding the colors. So maybe you're like me. Maybe you think about color a lot. You think about why organizations paint a room a certain color. Maybe you think about why car companies are only producing like a small spectrum of colors for cars these days. Maybe you're thinking about things like why do companies choose certain colors for their logos. These are all fascinating, aren't they? You can probably see from this slide here that I chose this image, which is a beautiful painting by Henri Matisse, because it nicely coordinates with my logo. Now, when we're thinking about colors, colors can be neutral, right? We think of neutral colors, but in the way that they are used by artists, they are never neutral. They are all about carrying meaning and deploying strategy for artists. And today we're going to travel through the centuries and see just how they do it. Let me give you a sense in terms of how we'll spend our hour together. Here's our program overview. We're going to start off with just a little bit of color theory, just to give us a sense in terms of how human beings have been thinking about color for the past 2,000 years or so, and then basically make our way through the rainbow. Gave it some cheery little section titles here, and we'll finish up with just over the rainbow. Now, like I said, it's kind of a different feeling today. Most of my programs are sort of chronologically organized. Today, we're all over the place, thinking about how different artists have used color differently. So it's a little freewheeling, but we're going to get started with the headier stuff and move through it pretty quickly. So let's get started with just understanding color. We're going to go all the way back to ancient history. This is a painting by the Renaissance artist Raphael, but it's his depiction, his anachronistic depiction of all of these great philosophers throughout time assembled together on these steps. We're zeroing in on Plato and Aristotle because it's really, well, Aristotle who's attributed with writing this first significant treatise on thinking about color. In fact, it probably wasn't Aristotle, but this is a good image for us to be thinking about. So back around the 4th century BCE, he writes on color, and he starts to devise really a means of understanding how we see color and what it actually is. So his thinking is that all color originates from black and white, and it's related to the four elements of earth, wind, fire, and water. And we can see in Raphael's depiction of Aristotle way over here on the far right that he is motioning downwards. Everything, all of his ideas were really grounded in what he could see and observe in reality. So in his treatise, he posits that colors are properties of objects, not inherent qualities of light itself. And this treatise was essentially widely held for about 2,000 years as the definitive theory on colors. That is until Sir Isaac Newton replaces this in the late 1600s. And we've got this 19th century engraving imagined rendering of Sir Isaac Newton using a prism to deconstruct color here. So he is involving physics in this, and he's giving us a whole new way of understanding the relationship between light and color. Isaac Newton also gives us the first color wheel. He didn't design this one. This was part of a publication from just a few years later. But he devises this means for artists and the world to understand these color relationships and how they connect to each other, how they relate to each other as well. Now, the German philosopher and polymath Goethe also wrote about color just a few years later in the early 1800s. And he challenged Newton essentially by focusing on the human perception of color and really all that we bring to it with our psychology, with our associations, with our memories, and how it influences the way we see and understand color. So it's not just about the physics, it's about who we are as human beings. Shortly after Goethe's writing about this, we have a French chemist who shows the world in a very systematic way that colors, our perception of colors, can dramatically change according to what color it's next to. The neighbor matters in this case. So the publication of theories like this essentially rock the art world. That delivers to us things like the French Impressionists and post-impressionists like Vincent van Gogh. So it's like this mix of science and philosophy. We head into the 20th century and we see a dramatic shift away from the science, actually, with a treatise from Vasily Kandinsky, who wrote Concerning the Spiritual in Art. And he argued that colors have inherent emotional and spiritual properties. This is probably one of his most famous images from 1913. It's a color study on these squares with concentric circles in it. And we can sort of see, once again, how our perception of a color can change according to the colors around it. But these color relationships can move you emotionally in different ways as well. Now, our understanding of color today is influenced by all of these things and has this kind of scientific spin to it because we have the Munson color system tree. This is kind of an older version. This is the technological version, which gives us a really well-defined system for identifying specific colors. So on this tree, you have hue, value, and chroma, and you can assign labels to specific colors within that tree too. So graphic artists today still use essentially this color tree system in order to make sure that they're using a consistent color, let's say across brands or across products. So this is all well and good, but we today are really focusing on not just the broad brushstrokes of understanding the history of how humans have understood color, but we want to root this in artistic practice as well. Because for many of the images that we'll be looking at today, it involved artists and their apprentices, more likely their apprentices, grinding up color pigments for them to use to apply to the surface of a canvas. And we see just a little bit of that in these two wonderful images here. It's a good reminder to us in a big workshop like this. Every artist probably started as an apprentice grinding up color pigment for a master artist. It was part of your education. So you'd get to know these materials really well. And even if you understood them, they were sometimes inconsistent. They were sometimes unstable after you applied them. So there were all sorts of factors at play in terms of creating great colors throughout the years. So with that all said, we're going to turn our attention now to the rainbow. We're going to start off by seeing a little red. And red is such a great color because it is multidimensional in terms of our perception of it. It's a color that grabs your attention. It's a stop sign. It's a heart-shaped candy box at Valentine's Day. It is a Jolly Santa's red suit, right? It's also visceral, it's dangerous, it's blood, it's mortality. Psychological studies link red to things like dominance and aggression and an increased heart rate. So you probably wouldn't want to paint the walls of a kindergarten classroom bright red or blood red, but maybe you'd want to paint the lockers in like a high school gym red, something like that. So let's turn our attention to how red has some of the interesting ways that red has been sourced historically for artists. These days, these are all primarily done through chemicals, but throughout history, I mean, it's a story of like a global search for the best pigments to produce the best colors for artists. And so on the left here, we're looking at a cinnabar crystal. This one in particular comes from China. And on the right, we have two images of these bugs that live on these prickly cacti in Central America that were sourced and ground up for a great red pigment and shipped around the world once we started to see global trade with like the Dutch East India Company. So next time you're looking at a lovely Baroque image, just imagine the bugs that were sacrificed to be a part of that image. So strange sources and incredibly valuable sources throughout the world in order to achieve this beautiful red color that we know so well today. Now, I'm going to start off with this incredible image here from Amy Sherald. It's from 2012. It's a really unexpected image in terms of this kind of blood red background. It really sets the figure that we see on the canvas here apart from her surroundings. She's sort of in this dreamlike setting here. And I think that, well, the story that goes along with this painting is that this lovely, almost like a beauty queen that we see here, complete with her crown and sash, looking so elegant and composed. Well, our artist, Amy Sherald, has sort of poked us, the viewer, because she has entitled this work Welfare Queen, sort of defying our expectations around a title like that. And by surrounding this woman with this visceral color here, it packs an emotional punch to it, doesn't it? Now, on top of that, layered on top of that, the very year that Amy Sherald painted this picture, she actually received a heart transplant. So this was a woman who was already sort of steeped in her own mortality and thinking about the way her body works and the fragility of her body. And so it's all kind of poured into this picture, and I would say with this incredible, impactful red. Now, throughout the history of art, red is used to signify blood or to signify violence. We have on the left here a Van der Weyden crucifixion diptych. So we have a two-paneled altarpiece, and it's a relatively bloodless crucifixion. We just see like a few drops of blood trickling from the hands, from the wounds of Jesus on the cross here, but he is set in front of this red cloth, this red drapery, which underscores what we know to be the brutality of his torture and his crucifixion along with that, without having to literally show the gore there. Now, Norman Rockwell, I love him as a colorist, and I think his image The Problem We All Live With from 1964 is just so incredible in the way that he deploys that red color, because he has that tomato smacked up against the wall just beyond or just behind the image of this little girl who's integrating a Southern school. It drips down the wall and it recalls our associations with red dripping blood. It reminds us of the danger that this little girl was in such a smart and impactful way. Now, there were a number of artists in the 20th century who were really interested in the power and the emotional associations that we have with color. Henri Matisse was a great one for that. This is his picture called The Red Studio. It's from 1911. It's almost overwhelming. Maybe it is overwhelming in terms of how much red he has used to convey this space. And I want you to just sort of check in with yourself as you're looking at it. I mean, is that a welcoming red? Is that a threatening red? Does it feel blisteringly hot in there? Oh, hold on. What happened here? Sorry about that. Looks like there we go. So we have to sort of calibrate how the emotional response that we have when we're looking at something like this. For Matisse, it was really about conveying the incredible pulsing creative energy of that studio with this very vibrant red here. He was known to do several interiors that are filled with this red color, and they really do pack an emotional wallop. Now, Norman Rockwell deploys red in a slightly different way in another favorite image of mine. This one is called The Holdout from 1959. And we're in a jury room here where there are very intense deliberations happening. And I think that is amplified and ratcheted up by the red colors on the walls here. If they were in a white room, perhaps this wouldn't feel quite so charged, but we can see this young woman is our jury holdout here. There's a man directly behind her who's dressed all in red tones, and Rockwell further moves our eye through the composition with her red shoes, his red socks. We see these great little highlights, but those red walls in this circumstance, I think, increase the tension in this particular room. We're going to stay with Rockwell for just a moment here because he was a great one for using red to move your eye around a composition. So he could use it sparingly, but very effectively. This is his beloved triple self-portrait from right around 1960, where we can see him from behind looking into a mirror. There's sort of like a goofy reflection in that mirror where we can't actually see his eyes because they're hidden behind his glasses, and his pipe sort of drooping out of his mouth. And then, of course, he seems to be painting a much more jocular and confident version of himself without glasses on the large canvas in front of him. But we notice that there are just these little spots of red that take our eye around. And I think my eye sort of goes to where almost all the red is, which is on the legs of this chair. It sort of moves us over to Norman Rockwell himself, the cushion underneath his rear end, and then sort of up to the top of the top right corner of the canvas that he's working on. His maul stick sort of guides us that way, where we get a few more beats of red from the images by Rembrandt and Picasso there. So it's a nice way to literally guide us through a picture. And artists do this, artists throughout the centuries have done this in different ways. We have a Vermeer over here from the 1600s, the lace maker on the left, and then on the right, we have this modern image by Mondrian called New York City from 1942. And with these two images, I'm reminded of how red just commands our visual attention, and red kind of advances forward in a picture more aggressively than any other color. It is a single element that can dominate a picture. And I would say, as lovely as this woman is in her yellow dress here, it's like this little swatch of red thread that seems to be pushing out towards us that my eye just goes to every time I see this image. And even though all of these bars of color are intersecting and overlapping, his sparing use of red in the image over here on the right, it just pops out. It emerges more confidently than the yellows and the blues here. Now, artists have written and spoken quite a bit about the power of red in their images. These are two beautiful paintings by the Impressionist artist Auguste Renoir. On the left, we have Dance at Bougival, and on the right, Two Sisters on a Terrace. I just wanted to share with you this wonderful quote from Renoir. He said, "I want a red to be sonorous, to sound like a bell. If it doesn't turn out that way, I add more reds and other colors until I get it." And I love these red hats in both of these pictures that just draw your attention, and they almost function like that bell that he sort of philosophized about. Now, reds can move your eye around a composition, but they can just anchor a composition in such a powerful way. This is J.M.W. Turner's, one of his seascapes from 1832. It's in a museum in Tokyo, Japan. There's a famous story around this particular seascape because he was hanging it at the Royal Academy of Art's summer exhibition. He brought it in early, and the artists were allowed several days to varnish their works or sort of fix up their paintings if they were damaged at all in transportation. And everybody was sort of waiting with bated breath to see what J.M.W. Turner would do with this composition. He was already this highly esteemed artist, and he came in one day and he basically just slapped on a little bit of red paint for a buoy here and walked out of the room. And another artist that was also there varnishing his rather fussy painting said it was like Turner had fired a shot. It was just such a smart way to finish off this composition. And apparently, a little later on, Turner walked back in and he shaped it a little bit more carefully into a buoy. But just adding a little bit of red there, organized and kind of brought this picture together. It sort of serves like a home base on a baseball diamond all of a sudden. Now, in terms of portraiture, reds can function in very different ways. We've got our Marie Antoinette over here by Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun on the left, and then over on the right, we have John Singer Sargent's portrait of Winifred, Duchess of Portland. And I would argue that with the red with Marie Antoinette over here, it was a conscious choice on the part of the artist to portray a sense of maternal warmth. Of course, the Queen's public image was very much suffering at this time, and to show her as a warm and doting mother, especially a mother that had even lost a child, that's the significance of the empty crib here, of course, was a way to win some affection in the hearts and minds of the French public. Over here on the right, with John Singer Sargent's portrait, we have this big red cloak that's sort of slipping off of the shoulders of this very tall, statuesque stunner here. And even though the dress and this high collar are already very sensual, it's a way to add a little bit of passion and suggestion to what is otherwise just a white and ivory colored painting. It certainly draws your attention and adds that pulsating heart there, increases the heart rate, right? So reds have also been used strategically for political works of art for for centuries. And we're looking at Emmanuel Leutze's famous depiction of Washington crossing the Delaware from 1851. Think for a moment how different this painting would feel if there were not any reds in it. I mean, it seems necessary to have George Washington wearing a little bit of red, and then all of a sudden you appreciate how he has kind of punctuated almost every other figure in the boat with just a little bit of that warm color too, set against this very icy cold crossing of the river here. So the reds serve this, underscore this political message here of political strength, political power, military power as well. We see that in the famous painting of Napoleon crossing the Alps alongside Kehinde Wiley's updated version from just a few years ago. But again, would Napoleon seem anywhere near as powerful, even in the same pose, in the same setting, without that massive red cape swirling around his body? And even though Kehinde Wiley doesn't make the cape red here, he keeps the red in terms of the background. And art historians always talk about how Wiley's backgrounds essentially function as like a new field of power. And so keeping the red in this case certainly helps to translate all of the authority that was imbued in Napoleon from the original painter, Jacques-Louis David, back in the early 1800s. So we wrap up our look at reds, and I think reds are I have the most slides for red here. Just considering for a moment too, the complementary color for red is green. And we have so many powerful associations with that, right? There's a reason why green and red are Christmas colors. They have strong associations in us. I have here almost a flower painting from Georgia O'Keeffe. It's called Trees in Autumn. She painted it really right before she launched her flower paintings in the early 1920s. But we can see that it is essentially a very powerful image because of this use of the complementary colors. Now, one last note about the red and the use of complementary colors too. Sometimes it can go awry, and purposefully, because as we look at Vincent van Gogh's depiction of the Night Cafe from 1888, he was very consciously bringing together two colors that he thought had this dissonance and would almost alienate people when they looked at it. He's painting this haunt where people hang out after midnight, and he wrote to his brother about how he tried to express the terrible passions of humanity through his use of green and red here. He described this little cafe as a place where one could go and ruin themselves, go mad, or commit a crime, all through what he called the violent exaggeration of the colors here. So, so sometimes our regular associations, red and green, Christmas, can have a totally different effect if you just change the tone here a little bit too. So let's turn our attention now to the next color in the rainbow, orange you glad. And there are really nice warm associations with the color orange, aren't they? It's this nice halfway point, of course, between red and yellow. It's this warm color. And historically, how was it sourced? Well, it wasn't as high of a priority because, of course, it's a secondary color, and you could try to mix pigments to achieve it. But oranges were oftentimes sourced through highly toxic natural pigments like we see here. And so what we'll see is especially in the 1800s, by the time chemical processes were involved in creating some of these colors, almost all of them became very toxic. So working as an artist was a very dangerous job. Let's turn our attention to Vasily Kandinsky. Once again, this is his painting called Quiet Harmony from 1924. And in it, of course, we're looking at non-objective art, a purely abstract painting. So the colors and the shapes are there to move you. Kandinsky described orange as red brought nearer to humanity through yellow. And this quote is oftentimes associated with his particular color theory, where he explored that emotional impact of colors. In his view, yellow is powerful, but potentially aggressive, while red is more vibrant and energetic. It's funny, I think most people think of red as being a little bit more aggressive too. So they blend together and they become more accessible and more approachable. This whole picture is sort of a wash in something that just feels like a nice warm glow. Now, accessible and approachable, I think we get that to a certain degree through the oranges in both of these images. We have a lovely young woman and sort of a tired looking older woman, both portrayed alongside these vibrantly colored orange pieces of fruit. And in some ways, it's supposed to be alluring. In both compositions, it's kind of like the brightest spot where your eye travels, and it's a means by which to introduce you to these characters. It's the warmth of this color that helps these artists achieve it. So, of course, our probably our most famous redhead, orange-haired artist would be Vincent van Gogh. We've mentioned him already, but you can see how he subtly uses yellow and orange in particular when we're looking at one of the one of the portrayals of his bedroom here. So it creates a psychological warmth, I would say. We do know that Vincent van Gogh was so proud of this little space. It was like a room of one's own kind of thing, where he had set it up, and he had decorated it, and he painted it 3 different times. And this overwhelming color of this yellow, I think, really serves to underscore where he was emotionally and how he was feeling about this space that he had organized for himself. Now, we also have this sense of warmth and sort of fun and frivolity as we look at this wonderful image of a spring sale at Bendel's from the artist Florine Stettheimer here. This is from 1921, and we can see how she uses this orange to navigate our eye through the entire picture, and we get this wonderful sense of energy with this combination of the pinks and the reds and the oranges. It invites us to dive right into the shopping excursion with all of the figures that we see here. Now, in addition to this warmth, sometimes orange is used to just simply grab your attention, or it could be like a warning, like a construction sign or a traffic cone. And I think we get a similar feeling when we look at this mural from the artist Keith Haring back in the 1980s, in the midst of the crack epidemic. Keith Haring took it upon himself to paint over an old wall in an abandoned handball court. The message "crack is whack." This is his second attempt at that, because he did get arrested after he painted the first one, and then that was graffitied. But here we see his message loud and clear. I think orange as the background here was so brilliant, and actually it's like, when you think about it, it's like the only color he could have used. Red would have been too aggressive, yellow maybe too meek, but the orange signals the danger here, but keeps your eye trained on the image itself. So we can see, the skeleton with the crack pipe. We can see the burning money. We can see his signature dancing figures that look like they are writhing around in some sort of medieval version of hell here too. So a really important warning. Now, orange has this wonderful heat to it, and it's used as the color for fire and glowing embers throughout the history of art, and of course used for some of the most glorious sunsets you could ever imagine. So this is Albert Bierstadt's Sunset on the Rockies. This is in a private collection, but it's the kind of painting where you just sort of squint and you see how much of this picture is given over to this beautiful orange effect. It's we've got the brilliant shimmering light, but it's like the clouds, the color on the side of the mountains, and this almost the entire central part of this picture is given over to this warm color here. Now, Georgia O'Keeffe had a really different approach to painting a sunset. This is called Sunset Long Island from 1939. And so we just get these gently rolling hills in essentially blacks and grays. And again, she's chosen a very specific color for that sun. She doesn't give us the glorious sky, just the big burning orb there hanging above and sort of complementing those gently rolling hills. And it has to be that nice warm color there. Of course, Claude Monet was also using orange in a very similar way in his landscape explorations of color, whether he was painting grain stacks or the facade of the Rouen Cathedral, or over here, a grand church in Venice, Italy. He's always kind of dipping back into that orange to signify that warm light that emanates in the last hours of the day. But that was sort of his goal in terms of art making, to capture those momentary effects of light and shadow. As the day ends, he reached for that orange color. Orange has this wonderful kind of ethereal quality to it. This is a George Tooker painting called Gypsy from 1951. It's sort of like its own little sunset here, but it's a business stall where you go in and get your fortune read. And here it glows seemingly with like a light from within. This is a tempera painting, and we can just make out the silhouette of a figure standing behind this big orange curtain here, but it provides this remarkable sense of warmth. It sort of draws you to it, even if the figure herself looks a little bit closed off and distant here. Now, I look at Mark Rothko's use of orange in these two slides here, and you almost get the physical sensation of warmth and envelopment. We think of orange and we think of vitality and, well, when I look at these, I'm like reminded of like a toaster almost. It just feels so blazingly hot as I look at them. So Mark Rothko was, I mean, he was a master when it came to his deployment of color. And so his very subtle gradations of color, his complementing frames here give us such a rich sense, and like I said, an all-enveloping sense of the oranges in these two compositions. Now, I can't talk about orange without sharing this knockout of a painting. This is called Flaming June by the artist Frederick Lord Lytton. It's painted in the late the late 1800s. And this is sort of orange as fire and heat personified. We have this woman whose dress sort of speaks to this summer month. And in all of these ripples and in all of these folds, we get that wonderful sense of the warmth of the month of June. This is like a call out to this time of year, really. So, it's probably not surprising that the art collector Samuel Courtauld of the Courtauld Institute in London actually called this the most wonderful painting in existence. It's something about that color combination and all of these fantastic little wrinkles and folds that are included here that give us such a warm feeling. So we wrap up our look at orange with just the reminder of its complementary color as well. When we're thinking of oranges, the complement is, of course, blue. We've got another George Tooker painting where the oranges on the windowsill here take us back to this fantastic blue pattern and into this windowsill where we have this kind of skeptical figure looking out at us. So those colors together just resonate and sort of pull us into a composition. Now, I'm already kind of, okay, just checking on myself for our timetable here. Our sections get a little bit shorter now. Now, turning our attention to yellow. Yellow has fascinated artists for centuries. It is a key pigment in Western art. It's sourced in a variety of ways over the years, but actually during the 19th century in Bengal, of all places, they would actually force feed mango leaves to these like malnourished cows and then collect their urine and use that urine to produce some of the best yellow pigment that you could imagine. Over the years, too, there have been various versions of kind of toxic paint produced as well. So when we think of yellow, we tend to think of joy. If we, think of the movie Inside Out, and you have, the figure of joy with that yellow skin. This is a lovely painting from James Joseph Tissot, and it's simply called The Hammock from 1881. And it's just punctuated with all of these bright patches of yellow here, giving us this sense of a warm and comfortable day. Yellow is so closely associated with Vincent van Gogh and his sunflowers, and so we understand through his writings, through his paintings, that yellow was emotionally and sort of spiritually charged for him, and it certainly brought him joy. He said, "The sunflower is mine," and for him, it really represented gratitude. So these are, in some cases, I mean, he painted sunflowers on 12 different occasions, but we can see it's almost an all over yellow painting. It was a pigment that was fairly new at the time. And so here he is experimenting with it and really finding long lasting success with it as well. Yellow can be a tricky color too, because it can also sort of speak to madness. It can be this kind of supercharged color, and it can sort of read as enlightenment and psychological distress at the same time. And I think you get a little bit of that in Paul Gauguin's self-portrait here from 1888. He sets this kind of sneer-like self-portrait here against this vivid yellow wallpaper in the background. And he sent the painting in advance of meeting Vincent van Gogh. He sent it to his fellow artist as sort of a way of introducing himself. And apparently this caused great anxiety in Vincent van Gogh, because he didn't quite know what to make of this sort of unrelenting oppression of between the face and this bright yellow color here. Now, in our lives, we can think of yellow as being a caution, of being a warning. It's on taxi cabs, it's school buses, and sometimes it's just to alert us to things. And we can see Rembrandt using that in a similar way in this absolutely gorgeous painting from 1638. This is called Belshazzar's Feast. And what we see here is this king who is using these golden objects that were stolen from the temple for a party, essentially. And what happens during this party is that, like, this disembodied hand, like essentially the hand of God, comes out of nowhere and spells out this warning message to him. So everybody's looking at that warning in yellow up there on the wall for essentially defying God by using these objects from the temple. Yellow, sometimes we think of yellow as like being like yellow bellied or as being fearful. Well, throughout the history of art, yellow is oftentimes tied to cowardice, and specifically to the figure of Judas. Going all the way back to Giotto's painting from the early 1300s, this is his portrayal of Judas kissing Jesus to alert him to the Roman authorities here. He's betraying Jesus with a kiss, and we can see that he has enveloped both of their figures with this distinct yellow cloak here. So sometimes we see yellow signifying jealousy, envy, and cowardice this way. But artists through the years have used yellow to create this incredible luminosity in their paintings. We have an example of Titian's work over here on the left, and on the right, a painting by Jean-Auguste Dominique Eng, where it seems as though there's like a light switch right next to the picture, and this yellow color is actually emanating light from within the canvas in order to portray, of course, this divine light, this heavenly realm in which the figure of the Virgin Mary in both of these cases is situated. So this is something that we see throughout the Renaissance, even into more modern artwork today. This is an unbelievable Annunciation painting from 1898 by the artist Henry O. Tanner here, where Mary sits looking incredibly small and humble in this very spare interior, and this beam of light representing the angel Gabriel or God himself comes to this space to tell her that she is divinely pregnant. We have a gorgeous seascape here from a Russian artist. This is called The Ninth Wave from 1850. We see these figures that are on essentially an an improvised raft here. It looks like it even has ice on it, but this light from the sun that is filtering through the waves as they crest here, creating the seafoam green. There's lavender here. That sun, though, is emanating with the brightness of the actual sun. The luminosity achieved here is breathtaking. And a famous colorist from America in the 20th century, of course, is Maxfield Parrish, who was able to achieve his luminous colors with a complex system of like glazing and varnishing. And we get that effect here, not for any sort of religious or heroic purposes. Well, I guess heroic to a certain degree, because what we're looking at is a depiction of dawn, milking time. So here we have a farmer who's heading out in the earliest hours of the day to go get his work done. Artists like Vermeer are celebrated for incredible luminosity in his paintings, this sense of real light filtering in through that same window that he paints on the left-hand side in so many of his compositions. With the milkmaid here, we can sort of zoom in and see how he uses little dots of yellow throughout his composition, especially in the still life here, just to suggest that that brilliant light filtering in through that window. And if we move up just a little bit, my computer's not letting me do that. Sorry. Let's see if we can go back here. Stay with me, folks. I think my computer is just being a little slow here. Okay, here we go. And even up here where we see these different textures as well. The metal canister here with the handle and the basket all suggested the materiality of them through these little dapples of yellow paint. So sometimes yellow just provides a little break in a composition. I've always loved this image, the young decadent, a woman who's just come home from a ball. And you have this beautiful green setting here, but it has this wonderful yellow punctuation with this little, it's probably like her dance card in her hand as she's collapsed on the sofa here. It's just a nice way to kind of move your eye around the composition. It might even bring you down to a little bit of yellow in the rug and then back over here to her hand. The artist Manet also uses yellow in a similar way. We can see he's drawing your eye directly to it here in this rarely seen work, really. It's a depiction of his future wife and her son. We can see this trompe l'oeil effect with the peel of that lemon coming over the edge of the table. And then again, your eye sort of dances around the composition, finding these little breaks of that light color throughout. Norman Rockwell, you know I love him. We go back to him again. He uses color almost in the same way that he used red earlier to, again, move your eye around a composition, from the chair that's being moved into the house here to the young boy's sweater to the car up at the top of the composition in his famous painting, The New Kids on the Block. Now, I'm sure you didn't think we'd see Starry Night this early in the rainbow, but it's used, of course, yellow is used as a complementary color to blue and violet. And without these shimmering, vibrating stars and moon in Vincent van Gogh's famous painting from 1889, you wouldn't have this continued fascination with this night sky. So it's all about the interplay of these colors here. Now, moving quickly along, we're going to turn green with envy. Talk a little bit about, where green has come from historically. It wasn't quite as hard to source as some of these other colors. We have verdigris on the left over here. We can see somebody actually making some. It was created historically by exposing copper to vinegar vapors. And then we have malachite over here on the right, which is a natural mineral pigment. But really one of the most expensive options in terms of what was available to artists. Now, like I said, the 19th century options turned out to be pretty toxic. One of the biggest challenges for artists was that they could create a beautiful green for their pigments, but then oftentimes those greens were unstable and would darken into browns. Perhaps that's why these early Northern European, these early Northern Renaissance paintings really just are such knockouts because we're unaccustomed to seeing such vibrant greens from such early paintings. We have Hans Holbein's famous painting, The Ambassadors, at the center here, and it's flanked by two portraits by Jan Gossert. So in each of these pictures, we see the artist using this incredible verdant green in these images here, and that there's several reasons for it. The color would kind of make these flesh tones pop. It is a color that was associated with renewal and hope, and sometimes even virtue. But probably most importantly, for the subjects that we have here, it was a color that was associated with wealth and prosperity because it was such an expensive pigment at the time. Now, when we're thinking about green, it is almost always about fertility, it's about growth, it's about nature and the natural life force. And so we have Monet on the left here, we have Klimt on the right, creating these all-encompassing green spaces that make us feel like we're walking into the water lily pond or into the park where Klimt painted. And in both of these scenes, we have artists that aren't just exploring the depiction of plants, but really how light filters through them and how the wind moves through them as well. Now, I tend to have a few paintings that I like to go back to. And I really do love this painting by Jane Oneail of Barack Obama from 2018 because it is so unusual and so outstanding in the history of art to portray a president with this fecund background here. It's a picture that we'll continue to talk about and to consider for years to come because of the unusual choices on the part of the artist, but associating a relatively young president with green, with growth, with creativity, innovation, all of these things come out because of these verdant associations that he has drawn here. Now, in the history of art, greens are always used for landscapes. And in American art in particular, very vibrant green was used to suggest the kind of virgin landscape that we have here in America, particularly in the 19th century. So I have up a series here from the American Hudson River School painter, Thomas Cole. This is a series that he did in 1840 called The Voyage of Life. So these are four stages of life here, from sort of infancy to childhood to adulthood to old age. And we can see during youth and infancy just how lush and verdant these landscapes are. And for the most part, that was the way America was portrayed in landscape painting from this time, as a contrast to the history, to like this sense of ancient history that was tied to Europe. America was an Eden, and it was reflected in this very vibrant green. Artists throughout the centuries have also tied green to the supernatural, to the uncanny, for otherworldly forces. Oftentimes, when we see artists portraying things like fairies from, A Midsummer Night's Dream, it's an overwhelmingly green composition. This one was painted by an artist named John Simmons. Here's another version of A Midsummer Night's Dream that comes to us by way of William Blake. And then over on the right, we have a work called The Demon and the Angel with Tamara's Soul. Again, an overwhelmingly green composition to underscore the nature of something that is otherworldly. And we've all probably heard of the green fairy too. That was the liqueur, the very popular drink absinthe that many French artists imbibed at the end of the 19th century, here depicted by various artists as an actual green fairy, which was sort of an easy leap because the alcohol itself, the liqueur itself, was green tinged here. So otherworldly elements made a perfect leap in that case. Green can also be used to convey psychological states. I mean, we think of green with envy, of course, but it has been long used to convey sort of a sickness of spirit too. This is one of Picasso's very last self-portraits. It's called Picasso Staring Down Death from 1972. Now, the composition and the lines, the eyes in particular, all could have suggested that, but adding the green flesh here, I think certainly underscores it. And you get a little bit of that same kind of anxiety with Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait from 1888. This is the one that he sent to Paul Gauguin in advance of their meeting. And even though he was very excited about endeavoring into what he imagined to be sort of like an artist colony with his new friend, you still get a sense of the swirling anxiety that might have existed in him around this time from the very unusual green that he uses as a backdrop here. Now, of course, you have at the turn of the century artists, fauve artists who were deploying color like sticks of dynamite. That's how one critic put it. And so now we're looking at Henri Matisse's depiction of his wife, Emily, with a green nose and with these wild colors throughout her dress. And prior to this moment, if you had painted anybody with a green face, it was probably because they were very sick. Now he's building off of emotional associations with color to use color expressively. People hated these paintings when they were first exhibited, but I think they've come around to loving them. I remember reading at the time, somebody said, "What color was your dress? Was your wife's dress and hat actually?" And he said, "Black, of course." So we turn our attention now to the color blue, which is my favorite color and one of the rarest, most expensive colors in history, also associated with technical breakthroughs. Over here, we are looking at lapis lazuli, which helped to produce the color ultramarine. It was a stone that had to be imported to Europe from Afghanistan. Ounce for ounce, it was more valuable than gold. Of course, indigo could also be used for creating this deep, rich blue as well. And indigo was actually created from the leaves of this plant here, and that was a practice that originated in India as well. So we think of like the global trade involved in sourcing these pigments, going far and wide to achieve the colors that we wanted to achieve. We're going to go back to Giotto for just a second. We had already looked at that image of Judas betraying Jesus over here. This was all part of a total design and painting commission that he had for the Scrovini Chapel in Padua, Italy. Stories of the life of Christ decorating the walls here, and we can see that it is absolutely covered in this beautiful cobalt blue that was derived from lapis lazuli in this case, making this a very very expensive commission on the part of Giotto. We can see here how that blue translates into this lamentation scene where Mary is crying over the body of the dead Christ here, her son. Her robes are oftentimes conveyed through this deep blue as well to suggest this kind of heavenly or spiritual realm. Really important painting here. We could spend the rest of the hour on it, but I wanted to continue on to just show you a few more knockout blues here. This one dates to the mid 1600s. It's another portrayal of the Virgin Mary here. In this case, it's all, well, my eye goes to this incredible, vibrant blue mantle that she's wearing around her shoulders. And it then draws your attention to the simple pose of prayer and her flawless features underneath this veil here. So a really stunning image that's just created with an economy of color here, but color that is so incredibly vibrant, meant to speak to, again, the spiritual realm. We oftentimes associate blues with Pablo Picasso too. Of course, he went through his blue period shortly after moving to Paris right around the turn of the century, and produced dozens of pictures that are dominated by this particular color. It I think underscores our associations with blue and melancholy, introspection, sadness. It's all there because these weren't just aesthetic experiments on the part of Pablo Picasso. He himself was actually feeling blue as he was painting in his blue period. He had just lost a friend of his, and he was sort of processing it through these pictures, also processing his own struggles with poverty and isolation at the time. So really powerful pictures. Edward Hopper is celebrated, I think, too, for some of his blue seascapes, and he had a way of channeling this color, deploying it to convey this incredible sense of peace and calm as you're looking at these gorgeous images. I think both of them were inspired by his time in Cape Cod. Now, when it comes to Hopper, we could probably debate, maybe there's always a little bit of underlying tension in his scenes, but I think our associations with the sea and with the colors of the sea tend to provide this sort of rest and sense of restoration when we look at them. And I think we have a similar effect when we look at some of Georgia O'Keeffe's blue abstractions. This one is called Above the Clouds 1 from 1963. And sure, maybe it was inspired by a plane ride, but um, it feels like a purely abstract work where you almost feel like these are like white lily pads that you could sort of skip across into this infinite horizon here. But again, the color choices, the richness of this blue right here in the foreground and the way it moves back is just, it provides this sense of spatial depth, but also this sense of peace and calm here. The idea of spatial depth is a big one. This is something that artists began doing centuries ago. It's the concept of atmospheric perspective. Artists began to understand that if you make the distance in your painting appear a hazy blue, that viewers will understand that that is farther away. So this is another painting by Albert Bierstadt called The Rocky Mountains Landers Peak. And we can see those Rockies just very faintly because we understand that they are much further away. We get a little bit of that atmospheric perspective too in Asher B. Duran's famous painting, Kindred Spirits. We kind of look right past Thomas Cole here and his poet friend, William Cullen Bryant, and we see these overlapping mountain features that get incrementally bluer as we go back in the distance. So we wrap up our blue with this great Manet pastel here, a depiction of his wife sitting on this very vibrant blue couch, but we're reminded again of the color theory and how blue looks so great if it's paired with the yellow, and we've got that yellow wall there. It makes for a really satisfying composition. So we're a little over time. We'll just fly right through our purple right now, but purple in terms of its history of how it was sourced is really a knockout of a story. We know that it was the mucus of sea snails, thousands of them harvested for like a single gram of this blue dye pigment that could be used. And we see the shells of those snails just over here on the left of the image. Now, this was such a laborious process, and getting this pigment was so difficult that it was almost always reserved for the richest people on the planet. It was reserved for royalty. That is in part the reason why we associate the color purple with royalty. We have here our image of Hans Holbein's portrait of King Henry VIII. Notice how he's wearing this little purple sash around his gargantuan waist in this case. And that was because he, as a king, he was very concerned with fashion and maintaining his status at the top of the pecking order. So he would create these sumptuary laws so that people couldn't wear certain colors, including purple. That was just reserved for him. Centuries later, we have women featured in John Singer Sargent's Gilded Age portraits that are also summoning those royal associations through their color choices too. This is Grace Elvina, Sargent's last painted portrait from 1925. That's at my hometown museum. And that purple sash there just conveys that wonderful sense of sort of royalty and authority in alongside this woman's very upright decorum and positioning here. Now, purple is also associated with the spiritual worlds and well, I would say kind of uniting the spiritual and the physical worlds. Purple sits between red and blue, and red's oftentimes associated with something that's earthy, and blue more spiritual. So it kind of comes together as like this thin veil between those two worlds. And here we have uh, the winter landscape with a church painted in 1811. This is by Caspar David Friedrich. And we see a little figure here praying to an image of Jesus on the crucifix just outside this looming church in the distance. So we understand that this purple setting, this purple sky here, lends itself to the spiritual underpinnings of an image like this. And even though Maxfield Parrish is most closely associated with his signature blue skies here, he oftentimes would create these snowscapes inspired by the New Hampshire landscape, where we see all of these different violets and lavenders throughout the composition. And he talked about how for about a minute a day, the sun just throws this incredible light across the hills. And he felt like it was his job to try and give some sense of that in his paintings. And I think, again, there's a spiritual component to that too. There is the late pre-Raphaelite artist Evelyn de Morgan, who actually explored mourning quite a bit in her artistic output. This is a work called The Mourners. Notice the prominence of the color purple here, as we have these four figures in the foreground who seem to almost be calling through this portal to loved ones lost in the distance. And loss is also associated with this color purple. This is Claude Monet's portrait of his wife Camille on her deathbed from 1879. It's been called a flurry of grief, and it seems as though these lavenders and these dark purples here are just the perfect color to express that. So we'll wrap up on a slightly happier note. When we combine purple with this kind of golden color, it's a little bit yellow, it's a little bit orange, as we see here with Vincent van Gogh's irises, we can achieve this vibrancy in the purple that I think is just absolutely exquisite and so moving here. So a very quick conclusion for a long program. Thanks for your continued attention. We'll just wrap up with Over the Rainbow here. We've got a rainbow of images for us to reflect on. Today's program has touched on the extraordinary lengths humans have gone to get paint colors, from precious stones to plants to bugs to animals. And in an effort, it was all done in this effort to communicate the full range of human experience. Through each band of the spectrum, we witness the many ways color serves as a bridge between the material world and the realm of emotion, memory, and meaning. So I will end there for now, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have about color. Obviously, it's a huge topic. So let me turn my attention here to the Q&A. Kara asked, did Vincent van Gogh always sign his paintings as a Vincent? Good question, Carla. I'm trying to think of that. I don't know off the top of my head. I can't say for certain if that's true. That's a really big question. I'd have to do a little bit more digging for that. But if anybody wants to do some Googling as we're waiting, please feel free. Great question, Carla. It's too big for my brain, I think. Ron says, two questions. One, who are the two painters who painted the women holding the oranges in the baskets? Oh, Ron, I'm so sorry I didn't mention that. We'll go back to orange. They're lesser known artists, and I apologize if I stumble over their names. Let's see. There they are. Let me go back to my notes. On the right, we have Pierre-Auguste Cotte. And then on the left, we have an artist named Alexander Gierymski. That was at the National Museum in Warsaw. So I'm guessing that's a Polish name. Two, he says, could Gauguin's self-portrait with the yellow background be deliberate, knowing of Van Gogh's mental challenges and knowing they were to spend time together at the Yellow House? Ron, that could very well be the case. That was such a fraught moment in history, wasn't it? he could have been trying to establish sort of a sense of dominance there. He was kind of the older, more accomplished artist in that duo. So giving a little bit of intimidation with a portrait like this, perhaps. Ellen asks a great question. Are black and white considered colors? And it depends on who you ask, Ellen. And I originally had them in the program, but obviously the program was just too big. Mary says, Jane, please pull together a program on black and white. Mary, I would love to do that. That will be next. And Sarah says, did Monet use purple as shadows? Yes, Sarah, he used purple as shadows and blue as shadows too. It's interesting because art historians write about it a little bit differently. Sometimes his painting called The Magpie is identified as being like one of his first departures where he almost eliminates the use of black as a shadow. And it's funny because there's like debate. Is it a blue shadow? Is it a purple shadow? But I think of him as using primarily purple. Somebody said, thank you. Oh, thanks so much for your nice comment. Liz says, several art historians have told me that in the Middle Ages, yellow was associated with evil, which is why Judas was usually painted in yellow then. Just wondering if you know whether or not this is true. Yellow had a number of associations during medieval times, and I'm not sure, like chicken or the egg here, if it started with Judas being painted in that color, or if Judas was painted in that color because of those associations. So, so I'm sorry I can't speak to like the cause of it, but it is a supercharged color, isn't it? Right? Like a little too much yellow can be alienating or grating. Did I already pass by our Giotto? I think I did. There it is. So we so we know that if depending on how much white, how much black you add to this, it can change our understanding of it. And I wonder if it's just, certain colors were associated with Mary, certain colors are associated with Judas. So it's just something that unfortunately I don't know for sure, but that's a great question. Sort of what happened first, the color association. Could sort of go both ways. So I think I got the Q&A questions here. Let's see, maybe a few more. Okay. Oh, Carla, commonly used Vincent, speaking to Vincent, signing his name sometimes as VVG. Good to know. Thank you for sharing that, Carla. And Joseph says, any comments on the color Prussian blue? Joseph, I'm so sorry. I don't have anything prepared to talk about Prussian blue. Sorry about that. Lauren says, seems inside backgrounds were chosen to convey mental state, feeling, stature, etc., but that landscapes and so on did more closely depict actual colors of land and sea, etc. Are there artworks where the sea is red or the sky is green? That's a great question. There certainly are, Lauren. And we see more of that, I would say, like in the first quarter of the 1900s, where there is, I think, broader experimentation with color that way, and a willingness to kind of free it from old associations or what we observe in the natural world. But yeah, you don't see too much of it. I think your instinct there is right, that there tends to be more experimentation if it's like an interior, or if it's an emotional state, it related to a portrait. But yeah, I think we like our landscapes green, don't we? Let's see. Thanks everybody for the kind words in the chat. I think I got to most of the questions. Diane says, who is the artist who painted the queen with the red background? Queen with a red background. Let me think if I know that one. The one that we started with, sort of the beauty queen with the red background. That is Amy Sherald, and she's famous these days because she is the artist that painted Michelle Obama's official portrait as well. So let's see, and she's very young. I think she's in her mid-40s. Let's see. All right. Thanks everybody for your very kind words. I think we got to everything, Robert.
I think you did. A lot of kind comments in the chat. We appreciate that. So, folks, let's give Jane a big virtual round of applause for another great presentation. For those watching live, look for an email from me later today with a link to the recording, as well as information about some other upcoming virtual programs that might be of interest. I do believe Jane is back with us. We're partnering with the Chelmsford Library on Thursday, June 26th. So 3 weeks from today at 7 o'clock for the art and advocacy of Keith Haring. So that'll be coming up in 3 weeks at 7 o'clock on Thursday, June 26th. And we have lots of additional great art history webinars coming your way as well. And please make sure to take 60 seconds and fill out the feedback survey when you exit. Your feedback, as always, is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, Jane, and I hope you and everyone else has a great rest of their week. Thanks again.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.